But anyways, on to the news this week. You have a couple pieces about some new details that have come to light about actually an old lawsuit that the gun control group Brady had filed on behalf of a couple who lost their daughter in a mass shooting. If you want to tell us a little bit about some details that have come to light about how that lawsuit played out.
Yeah, this one's actually out of Colorado, where you are. It relates to the Aurora Theater shooting, where the parents of one of the victims attempted to sue Lucky Gunner and other retailers for selling ammunition and magazines and tear gas and body armor to the shooter. And it actually wasn't filed by Brady. This key detail here. It was filed at their urging and with their lawyers who were working pro bono. But Brady wasn't actually a plaintiff in this case. And that's important because when they lost this case, the plaintiffs had to pay for the legal fees of the defendants. And so this couple who'd lost their daughter in the Aurora shooting was forced to be on the hook for hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees. Now, the thing is, this shouldn't have come as a surprise to anyone involved. This case was, the judge called it meritless. It was a symbolic case. This is something that the gun control groups have been doing for decades at this point. They started in the 90s, filing these cases that are not so much designed to win on the merits and get a ruling in their favor. They're more designed to tie up gun companies in litigation that costs them a lot of money. And so in response to this tactic, which again started in the 90s, you saw the federal government pass the Protection of Lawful Commerce and Arms Act in the early 2000s. And you also had some states pass sort of riders or complementary laws to that, including Colorado, which still has a law that makes it more likely that the plaintiffs in cases like this against gun companies will have to pay for the defendant's legal fees if they bring a case like this. And, and by a case like this, I mean a case where the claim is essentially that the gun company or the ammo companies in this particular case are liable for the actions of a third party who commits a criminal act like murdering someone, right? Even if the companies had no sort of involvement in the actual crime, the idea here is to try and hold gun companies liable for basically gun crime, generally speaking. And so those sorts of cases in Colorado are especially hazardous to plaintiffs. This case didn't really state any sort of claim beyond the fact that these companies sold legal products and marketed them for sale, and then somebody used their products, in this horrific way. So that's sort of the core of what happened here. And this case was never going to be won. It wasn't really designed to be won, and they didn't win. And when they didn't win, they had to pay for the legal fees. And the thing is that they apparently were not fully aware of all of this. That's what they told the Colorado Sun. And that's really the core of the story now. It's coming out. We knew years ago that they lost this case. They lost this case back in 2015. They were ordered to pay legal fees back then. Now we're finding out from them that it bankrupted them and they weren't fully aware of the potential consequences. Brady didn't inform them. At least that's what the couple says. Brady says otherwise. Brady says, we did inform them. We told them about the risks.
Yeah, no, that's a pretty, I'd say, unsavory if what they're saying is correct, that a major, it's not uncommon that, as you said, they weren't directly involved, but their lawyers helped bring this case forward. Mm-hmm. It's not uncommon for advocacy groups like this to kind of spur on these lawsuits that align with them ideologically that they can then use to either fundraise or raise awareness. But if it is unclear whether or not they communicated properly that they could, in fact, be on the hook for hundreds of thousands of dollars, which they should have been aware. This law is longstanding. It actually predates the federal protection for gun liability shields. So it's not exactly that this was some novel law. This has been on the books for a while. So that's a pretty big deal. And like you said, Brady denies it, but it still raises some questions, I think, about the tactics of some of these groups.
Well, look, there may have been some conversation that Brady's lawyers had with this couple about, oh, well, if you lose, this is the potential consequences or what have you. But where they didn't really emphasize that they were absolutely guaranteed to lose. This was not a case that they were ever going to win. And it's not a case where they were likely to lose and not have to pay legal fees. You know, that's the thing. Like Brady provided them lawyers without, pro bono. So, they told them, our lawyers won't cost you anything. But if they didn't make clear, and I think it's hard to see any other possibility here. They may have told them some basic level of the risks involved or had them sign a form or something. But clearly this couple did not get the full message. And that's the problem. That's what's highly unethical here. These cases are fairly unethical anyway, because they're basically slap lawsuits. They're not designed to win. They've had one significant settlement, which was, again, a settlement, not a court victory. And as you mentioned, it was because Remington went bankrupt and their insurers were the ones on the hook for this lawsuit. And they decided to pay out the remainder of the insurance policy that existed, which was a lot of money, to be fair, and is perfectly good reason that gun control activists have tried to copycat that case ever since. Of course, they've lost all of the other ones that have come up in that manner. But, these are not cases designed to win on the merits. They're basically saying that you shouldn't have sold these legal products in the legal way that you did, right? That's the bottom line. They're not accusing really these companies of breaking any sort of law. They're accusing them of selling products that they don't think people should be allowed to buy. That's sort of the bottom line of these cases. And that's the reason why you've seen this proliferation of laws that protect against this specific kind of case. There's plenty of other ways you can sue gun companies, just like really any product manufacturer or dealer. If the product is defective, there are plenty of gun lawsuits that deal with defective firearms designs. Or if you defraud somebody or something, any of those other things. But you can't effectively sue a gun company just for selling guns, basically. And so, that's one level of questionability that goes on with these kinds of suits. In this particular case, it's even worse, I think, because clearly the plaintiffs, who are just, it seems, are just regular people or were just regular people, when they filed this suit, they obviously have their beliefs about gun control, which they're entitled to. And that's all well and good, but they obviously didn't have a clear understanding of what was going to happen when they filed this case. And Brady and their lawyers did have a clear understanding. There's no way they didn't know. Anyone who knows anything about this, I knew when this was happening, that this is how it was going to come out. That, there's the chance of it ending in a settlement like Remington is, any of these cases, is very small. That it's like one out of the thousands that this is, of these cases that have been brought over the decades. It's not, there is that one example now, so it's more than zero. But generally speaking, these cases are not designed to win. They're not designed to get to a ruling from the judge in favor of the plaintiffs. They're just designed to really tie up these companies in court, but also get favorable coverage. And this generated a lot of favorable coverage, right?
Right.
And the problem is these people weren't fully aware. It'd be one thing if they wanted say, we really don't like this law. They're still advocating against the Colorado law at this point. That's actually what this story that the Colorado Sun wrote was about. This piece of information that they were misled into this settlement, into this, sanction, is way down in the Colorado Sun story, way towards the bottom. Most of the story is about how they want to change this law. And it's fine if they fully understood what was going to happen. They don't like the law. They're creating a situation where they're going to have to pay a lot of money in legal fees because of this law. That's fine. That's how a lot of political litigation works. You find a situation you don't like, you set up a test case, and you go from there, even if you know you're going to lose because you're trying to generate headlines and political pressure. And that's really what this case was doing. The problem is that the plaintiffs didn't understand that that's how it was going to turn out. They seem to really think that they wouldn't. And they still seem pretty uninformed about the reality of what's going on, because this couple still wants to repeal this law, which is fine, but that's not going to really change what happened in their case. Even without that Colorado law, they probably still could have been held liable for damages. And it's much less likely, I think, without that law. But the case wouldn't have gone anywhere. The case is still
right.
It's still going to be blocked by the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act, which is a federal law.
Right. No, I agree. That's what I was going to bring up, the same point. The fact that, despite the hardship that they went through in this lawsuit and having to file for bankruptcy, they are, in fact, currently lobbying for the repeal of that law. And I believe at one point, at least the woman in this case actually worked for Brady for a little bit. So
yeah, Sandy Phillips.
So it's clear there's at least some ideological fellow traveling going on here.
It makes it more likely that they weren't lying about being misled.
That's true. That gives credence to their claim that they didn't feel fully informed on the risks, which is unfortunate. But it is worth noting that as of recording this, one day before we recorded this, Colorado did just introduce that bill to repeal this law. So we'll have to see how that goes. I think there's a good shot that they repeal it. But like you said, it doesn't really change the trajectory of these lawsuits. Perhaps the fee shifting goes away, but there's still a federal statute that governs this stuff.
I think fee shifting becomes less likely. Sure. Although it doesn't, the risk of that doesn't go away completely, because these are still basically slap lawsuits. And if a judge feels that your claims are meritless, as the judge in this case did, he might still award legal fees, because, why should the gun companies have to pay a bunch of money to defend against frivolous lawsuits? That's right. The whole concept of an anti-slap law, right? Frivolous lawsuits are bad. And so generally speaking, we try to disincentivize them as a society. Now, in this particular case, this is a law that's targeted specifically for the gun industry, because they've been at the center of this tactic. But I think that gets at another important point. This worked, right? There's going to get a little bit of negative backlash for essentially driving this couple into bankruptcy for political purposes without their full knowledge of what was going on. But I think that's wildly outweighed by how much positive, or favorable at least, coverage they got by having this couple put in that situation. Right. There was a lot of coverage at the time. In my analysis piece on this, which is a member exclusive over at The Reload, I pointed to a Rachel Maddow segment. She did an outrage-o-meter. And of course, the whole segment's about how outrageous it was that they got saddled with this payment for legal fees. And, that was the whole point of doing this. That was what they were trying to get, is a bunch of negative coverage about this law, so that eventually, so that it would put political pressure. Now, it's working now. Part of that is Colorado has just become more blue since 2015, right? But part of it is that there's an example of why Democrats should think this law is bad. And it was set up from the beginning. This was the whole concept of this case, not to win, but to lose in a way that generates a lot of attention and political pressure. And it worked.
Right.
Even though the people at the center of it feel misled and were bankrupted in the process, which is crazy because I think a lot of people had assumed, including me, actually at the time when I covered this, the outcome of this, I had written that it was Brady who was ordered to pay these legal fees, because Brady is going around talking about this as their case. They're providing the lawyers. The judge talked about how this is a basically political stunt by Brady, that he was alluding to them paying for this settlement. But in reality, they weren't on the hook. They didn't pay anything. They didn't help these people at all. Once they were ordered to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees, like they were just non-existent. And they told us, to their credit, they explained, one, they repeatedly said that they did inform this couple, although we've already gone over why that, even if they said something, it clearly wasn't enough. And then they said they just don't have enough money to cover costs, to cover settlements like this, which is pretty gross to me, I'll be honest with you.
Right.
Like, then why did you rope these people into this case? They couldn't cover it either. They went bankrupt. And also, like, Brady, while smaller than Everytown or Giffords or the NRA or these other groups, is a multi-million-dollar organization. If you can't cover the legal fees, and you haven't had a conversation with the plaintiffs saying, "Are you sure you can cover these?" then it's hard to conclude that your purpose in this wasn't to bankrupt these people for political reasons, to get headlines out of it, right? I mean, that's what happened, and it worked, right? This law is probably going to be repealed. Yeah. And it's at least in part because of what happened in this case. And I just find the whole thing terrible. Like, that's a terrible tactic.